Wouldn't you agree that not knowing what's going on or what's going to happen next can make you feel uncomfortable? So, how are you doing? How was that strange little pause? Did you feel a little bit impatient, maybe irritated, thinking, oh boy, she forgot what she wanted to say? So, to me, it was very uncomfortable, I can tell you that. Standing here on this stage, doing basically nothing for about 30 seconds, ignoring what everybody would tell you to do at a TEDx, to use the first 30 seconds to make a smashing appearance. But instead of only talking about uncertainty, I wanted to invite you into uncertainty, and if it's just for a brief moment. Because not knowing what's going on or what's going to happen next can cause discomfort, irritation, stress even. And we in our culture of optimization and efficiency and planning on insurance and perfection, we are so uncomfortable with uncertainty that we're trying to avoid it by all means. And we quickly jump to reasons and explanations and to answers and to solutions and skip this foggy, fuzzy, murky, muddy space of not knowing, of uncertainty. And yet, there's something there, something in that space between certainties, in that liminal space. And that's valuable. And if we skip that, we are missing out. It's worth sitting with not knowing, and if it's just for a little while, even though it might feel uncomfortable and seem inefficient. And I'm going to tell you why, but first I'd like to take you on a journey, on my journey of how I fell in love with that space between certainties. So I was always drawn to adventure, drawn to newness. I love to jump in head first, but I didn't realize, because to me, that was just normal. Until about 8 years ago, when my favorite person and I had this idea to buy an old sailboat, fix her up, sell everything, take the boys out of school, move to the boat, sail the world, and from the reactions we got from telling that to our families and friends. Wow, isn't that dangerous? What about the storms? Aren't you worried about the kids and the boat and the school and the money and the jobs? And what about the storms? And aren't you scared? And we're like, not so much. And not that we hadn't thought about these questions, we just weren't that worried. And it was only then that I discovered, there might be something there, something that needs to be explored, that there must be strategies to deal with uncertainty, and that apparently I had already been using some of them without even realizing, and I only needed to identify what these strategies were and show them to others. Easy. Well, I still had much to learn. And soon enough, I found my teacher, sailing. Because we did go through with our plan, of buying a boat and fixing her up and taking the boys out of school and untying the lines. And sailing was a very good teacher. And I think it's fair to say that I did learn a lot, but there was one thing in particular that I'd like to share with you today. And sailing taught me to let go, to surrender. And sailing also had two very potent teaching assistants. And the first teaching assistant was my body. I get seasick, quite a lot actually. Not the best prerequisite to go live on a sailboat, you might think. What a terrible idea, in fact. And you know how they say that there are two stages of seasickness? The first stage, where it's so bad that you're afraid you might die, and the second stage, where it's so bad that you're afraid you might not die. I'm familiar with both. In fact, I've discovered a couple of more stages. I should write a book. Anyway, I will never forget that first night out at sea. We were leaving Thessaloniki for the Greek islands. It was our first overnight passage ever. And it was a new moon night, and we were all alone in the middle of the ocean. Except we weren't really. It was just in my head, because the Mediterranean is no ocean, and we weren't alone either. There were ships and ferries and freighters, and we didn't even lose sight of shore. But it was still terribly exciting. And I remember being so new to the boat movements that every time we were heeling over, I caught myself worrying the boat might tip. I was very seasick that night, and in the many, many nights to come, and the days. So after much suffering, I realized that my seasickness wasn't something to fight, not even to control. And someone recently shared that Buddhist proverb with me: suffering is pain times resistance. And I had been resisting the movement of the boat, the back and the forth of the waves, the rhythm of the sea. I wanted to be in control, but the more I wanted to be in control, the more seasick I got. I needed a different approach. I needed to learn how to live with my seasickness, how to accept my seasickness as a part of me. So from then on, we only try to leave for passage under the best possible conditions, so that my vestibular organ, the troublemaker, the inner ear, could slowly adjust to the boat movements. And I also allowed myself to not feel responsible for anything, not sailing, not cooking, not boat schooling, until I was feeling better. And to my surprise, the world didn't end, no one starved, and the boat didn't sink. And after a day or two, I was feeling better. And I still get seasick to this day, sometimes, but it was nothing compared to what I was experiencing in the beginning. So my body taught me to not control what I couldn't control. And there was teaching assistant number 2, nature. One more thing to know about me is that I might be an uncertainty enthusiast, yes, but I love to plan. And I love complex projects. The wackier, the more impossible, the better. And I can imagine the wildest adventures, but the first step would always be a good, solid plan. And I project managed the shit out of this one. In our hallway was a 3-meter-long Kanban board with to-dos and doings and dones, and we had the map and we had the route. Everything was organized. It was perfect until we went sailing. Any of you guys sail here? You see, sailing and planning, not a good match. The wind and the weather and the waves just don't do what you want them to do. They don't bend to your wishes, not to mine anyway. And I had to learn this the hard way. And I don't remember how many times I was angry and sad or frustrated, disappointed, crying even, because we couldn't go where we wanted to go. We couldn't stick to our beautiful plan. Nature would not let us, or something broke down on the boat. So I learned that I couldn't change the wind or the weather or the waves, only adjust the sails and the course. And I also found that some of the most beautiful memories were made outside of our plans. So sailing taught me to let go, to surrender, to listen to my body, to trust that we will be okay, and that it's a good idea to have plan B, C, D, and enough canned tomatoes, and that boats are in essence money graves. And sailing also initiated me into the realm of not knowing, into the art of embracing uncertainty instead of just skipping it by using some strategies. And there are strategies, and they do help, make no mistake. But only using strategies to deal with uncertainty is a bit like trying to dance by analyzing the rhythm versus feeling the rhythm and letting the music guide you. So that's why today I'm not going to give you any strategies in these short 18 minutes. I'm going to instead give you something else, what I feel is much more valuable than any strategy. I'm going to give you a word, an idea, which is also the key to be able to dance with uncertainty. Humility. Humility is the attitude of not taking ourselves and our beliefs and our assumptions too seriously. It's knowing that assumptions are just that, assumptions. And the thing with assumptions is that they do help us. We constantly make sense of the world around us by making assumptions about it. And that's great, because without that, we'd be screwed and pretty lost. On the downside, assumptions can also trick us. We always try to take every piece of information and put it into our worldview to try not to let go of any of our certainties. So assumptions are also the source of our biases. Something else I learned on the boat. So when I started this whole sailing thing, I took a course in marine navigation. And we had to memorize the signs and the signals, the meaning of the lights and the buoys, and there were a lot. So for example, we had to be able to tell the distance of a nearby ship at night, the direction it was going, and whether it was on collision course, just by looking at some colored dots on a black background. So that could be a potential threat. Really not good. And I remember looking at that black square in my sailing theory textbook, trying to make sense of some tiny red and white and green dots, convinced I'd never be able to do that in an actual situation. But in fact, after being on night shift, after a couple of nights on the boat, I was in fact able to do exactly that. I could tell from staring into the black night whether a ship was approaching, which way it was going, and if it was a potential threat, just by looking at the tiny position lights. Our brains are amazing, and I was getting better with every night at sea. Fast forward 2 years, on our first Atlantic crossing, I was on my third night shift maybe, and I had what on the boat is called the dog watch, between midnight and 4 in the morning. And it's the person on shift's responsibility to take a 360-degree look around outside the boat every 20 minutes, because that's about the time it would take a big ship to approach from beyond the horizon and get near us. And being a tiny and small and slow sailboat made us vulnerable, so it was very important to be attentive. So I was tired, but I dutifully stepped outside into the cockpit every 20 minutes to check the black night for suspicious lights. And as I went outside, maybe the third time, I suddenly noticed a white light quite close behind us. And I jumped. What was that? Had I missed something? Wasn't I paying attention? And I quickly went below deck to check the AIS, which is similar to radar, and call the unknown vessel, radio the unknown vessel. But strangely, there was nothing on the AIS. The screen was black, except for the small dot that was us. And no one answered on the radio. So I decided to change course nevertheless and get out of the way of whatever was behind us. But before I got all geared in, I quickly went back outside to check again. And as I was looking at the light, I realized, very puzzled, that the light had moved. Not to the side, not closer, but further up. It didn't make any sense. And 1 in the morning is not my peak time, but after a while, it hit me. That light was no ship approaching. That light was Venus rising. My trained brain had totally tricked me. No wonder no one had picked up on the radio. That might have been an interesting conversation, though, but I was very, very impressed. And from then on, now when I catch myself making an assumption, I try to stop, to question it, because it might be Venus. I might be wrong. And this kind of humility, this wondering, this questioning is what we need in order to be able to not only endure uncertainty, but also to actually appreciate it. Because this space of uncertainty is the only space where actual new information can come in. This is where the magic happens. This is the home of creativity, of serendipity, you know, when you find stuff you haven't been looking for, of, like Columbus did with America, of epiphanies, of randomness, where new ideas can emerge, where anything can happen. And yet, in times like these, when the ground underneath our feet feels like it's shaking, we tend to hold onto our certainties and they're trying to lure us in and make us feel we're safe there. But the more furiously we insist that we are right and the others are wrong, are stupid and not getting it, the more rigid and polarized we become as a society, the more fragmented and fragile, the more barren of fresh ideas and creativity. The common ground that we so desperately need in order to tackle these immense challenges that we are facing as a collective, that common ground, that shared reality, lie at the margins of and in that liminal space between certainty. Rumi, the Sufi mystic, once said, "Somewhere between right and wrong, there's a garden. I will meet you there." And we tend to think that we need certainty in order to feel safe. But the feeling of safety comes from the inside. It comes from humility, from being open to other perspectives, from trusting that anything will always emerge, even though we cannot control it, from falling in love with saying, "I don't know." So to quote Hannah Gadsby, "Confidence makes you stupid." I'm very confident in this opinion. Thank you.